So new identities. I tried to pick artists here that I think try to consider how do you create, right, a new identity out of something old, something that may have been about oppression. This is Renee Cox. She always makes me smile. She does works where she tries to create this idea of superheroes, may we say. And she is actually in her superhero image as Rajay. She wears kind of this outfit that has colors related to African flags and such. And you'll notice this one's about the liberation of Uncle Ben and Lady J, as she calls her, Aunt Jemima. So the liberation of UB and Lady J. And I love this idea of taking these outdated, kind of images and saying, what if we turn these into these sleek, gorgeous, superheroes, and what if we, basically empower them to be something else. I love this image of her as Rajay, like sitting on the Statue of Liberty, saying like, we welcome everybody, you come on in, and having this attitude of power. She did a whole series where she took classic artworks. Notice here we have Manet again, probably his second famous work, The Luncheon on the Grass. And she takes this European painting that everybody sort of knows in art history and then translates it into sort of an Africanized, sort of idea of what the painting should be. It's simple, but it's so very smart as well. She did a whole series she called the Flipping the Script series, where she took something like Michelangelo's David, reinvented it with, African-American, models, something like the Pietà, Michelangelo's Pietà, and again, reinventing it. And of course, the most famous of them, The Last Supper, reinvented as Yo Mama's Last Supper. These were pieces actually, when they were displayed in New York when she made them, got a lot of scandal for like, oh, they're inappropriate. And I'm always surprised about what people are shocked at, I think these are very much about taking Western standards and kind of saying, what if you Africanize those standards? And to me, I don't really know what's so problematic about that. I think it's pretty interesting stuff. This is Yinka Shonibare. He's a favorite of mine. I mean, just look at that smile, right? How can you not love him? And I love his story. His story is of being born in Nigeria and being sent to British boarding school. And so he said that when he would go to Britain, he would get a lot of flack from his schoolmates about how African he was. But then he'd say, I'd go back to Nigeria and they tease me about like my British inflected English, that I was very British-esque. Nigeria was a British colony, so, again, it has a long history being linked to Britain. But he said, after a while I started to think about how I was lucky because I had information from both these cultures I could use. And so his quote, I'm poised between two cultures and enjoying every minute of it. Where he took something that could have been very negative for him and he turned it into something very positive. He started off thinking about how do you reinvent, again, Western classics. So very similar to Renee Cox, how do you do this? So he started to look at sort of European classic paintings and how could they be reinvented. This is some of my favorite stuff in art history. I just think it's really brilliant. So he took Fragonard's The Swing, which is a Rococo painting, one of my favorites, by the way, and is about sort of this flirty woman on a swing, kind of tempting both these men, very frivolous. And what he did is he translated it into a sculpture where he took the woman's head off. So in a sense, her identity was gone, right? This idea of like her identity was mitigated, and then dressed her in the same type of dress, but in Africanized fabrics. And also fabrics that you'll notice have symbols from consumerism, so the Chanel symbol. So he said, I was very interested in like this collision between like consumerism and African textiles and just thinking about this more global way of like dressing these figures that spoke to a more diasporic kind of attitude. He then went on to start doing these mannequins that you see like here dressed in these Africanized kind of fabrics, and creating, again, more large-scale revisionments of things like The Last Supper and such. Here, he kind of makes the Last Supper into this Dionysian kind of revel. If you look under the table, there's like these little goat hooves down there. But this sort of tangle of color and excess, and kind of changing almost even the meaning, right, of the original Last Supper into something different. He liked to venture into things about colonialism and sort of the attitude of colonialism. He did a whole photo series that he called The New British Dandy, where he basically took on this sort of attitude of Lord of the Manor, where he, as the black gentleman, was in charge, and everyone around him as his subordinates, right, were white. So, it's, again, kind of brilliant, kind of way of flipping the script, as Rene Cox would have said. This is a very public project he did after he became very, very famous. Again, he's considered sort of Nigerian British, and he did this for London's Trafalgar Square, what they call the Fourth Plinth Project. The fourth plinth is this empty plinth. It doesn't have a statue on it. The other statues have, famous Britons on it, like, Cromwell and such. And so he created this idea of like a ship in a bottle, speaking to the kind of stain of colonialism, but making the ship have these Africanized fabrics, kind of as their sails. So kind of combining kind of different ways to think about the problem of slavery here as well. Another thing that's interesting to consider with Africanized fabrics is they originally were goods traded by the Dutch to Africans, but then became kind of adopted by Africans, as symbols. So the kind of convolutedness of colonial practice, you can kind of go in a lot of different directions with that. Finally, the last artist I want to show you is Al Enotsui. He's a practicing artist right now in Ghana, in Africa, and he works with trash. And so you might say this is a weird place to stop with identity, but what I noticed when I traveled to Africa, I think back in like 2013 now, it's been a while since I've been there, but I noticed that African culture was very adept or good at using trash and thinking about upcycling and reusing. And so I do think this is a part of African identity. When I was there, I was compelled by how nothing was wasted. There's a lot of stuff from America that gets shipped over there, and they figure out things to do with it. So stuff that we just give to Goodwill or just go, oh, that's trash, whatever. They figure out ways to use all this stuff in very inventive ways. So again, they're very big upcyclers, recyclers. They use everything. I left Africa kind of with this sense of, I knew what was important to me when I left there. I realized that a lot of the stuff that we worry about here it's meaninless. That these were people that lived a very pure, simple life, and they were very appreciative of what they had. They had little, but they did what they could with it. And it was a very eye-opening experience for me. I'll never forget it. I actually want to go back. It's great there. It's a very cool place, very pure, very interesting, very open. But you'll notice in these large-scale sculptures he uses things like can lids, gum wrappers. He weaves stuff together, so it takes on this like textile look to it. My friends and myself were lucky enough to go see his show in the Brooklyn Museum of Art back in, I believe it was 2012. So we got to see these things up close and personal, and spend some time with them. And I love how he creates this sort of like textural, kind of feeling to the works, using all this trash to create these sort of beautiful, beautiful pieces. So I think he's an interesting place to stop with identity, because again, he speaks to maybe not an identity based on oppression, but an identity based on how do you take the simple things you have and how do you elevate them into something very, very powerful.